Hi, this is a video response to Marco from Multiverso Distópico's most recent video in which he talks about Lovecraftian horror. He also mentions the video that I did about Lovecraft some time ago, so thanks for that, Marco. But Marco focuses more on the subgenre, on this particular subgenre of horror that is Lovecraftian horror. He mentions some interesting things that I think are crucial to understanding the mythos of Lovecraft, but at the same time I think we could go deeper into certain aspects of those things. Well, he mentions how, for example, in role-playing games and in other forms of entertainment and fiction, some like comic books, movies, etc., sometimes they fail to capture that Lovecraftian essence because they lack or either don't handle as efficiently the elements of inevitability and uncertainty. And as many of you connoisseurs of Lovecraft know, Lovecraft focuses a lot on the fear of the unknown, of not knowing what to do against different entities and situations. And when it comes to the inevitability, is that those threats are so cosmic and powerful and great when compared to the human race that many times the main characters die or become insane, or many bad things happen, and it seems that no matter how much you try to stop those things, they happen. And I think Marco is right. I do have some things that I can add to go deeper into those aspects, but let me tell you what I think, why I think he's right in a great degree. In all of my every time that I played Call of Cthulhu, Realms of Cthulhu, etc., any Cthulhu related game, it's pretty much impossible to recreate that Lovecraftian horror because well, the themes have already been established quite solidly, and that's something that Marco talks about, that many of Lovecraft's closest friends and even disciples, if you could call them like that, they sometimes distorted the mythos by giving it a better structure. So he mentions August Derleth and how he gave more structure to the whole pantheon of mythos entities. And that took a bit away of the unknown of those creatures. And that happens many times in role-playing games because the players are already expecting to see these horrible things that still have like a theme, keeping them linked together in a way. And so many times you play role-playing games and they are actually just horror games, or sometimes action horror games, or even comedy horror games, because the characters do not act the way a Lovecraftian character would act. You really need to watch Marco's video. I remember I'm going to put the link in the description below. And for example, Marco mentions how sometimes those characters face off against different horrors, and it's almost like a given that they're going to assemble or form some sort of like organization or guild that fights the mythos. They always make like these small investigator groups that dedicate themselves to, oh, let's fight the mythos. But in Lovecraft's stories, there's never an organization dedicated to fighting those cosmic threats. So that takes quite a bit of the Lovecraftian experience, and just the character concepts as well, because it's very difficult to find players that want to play as a Lovecraftian character. Most of them want to play as sometimes in the style of another role-playing game. It's quite common in Call of Cthulhu, for example. I remember a time when they had one player, and that player decided to create like a priest that wielded like a sword cane of sorts, and always carried dynamite with him. And so you would be like, but that doesn't make sense with the character concept. And he was like, oh, well, he lived in a very tough neighborhood, so it was quite nonsensical. Or there was another player that wanted to play as sort of like an antique dealer or shopkeeper type of character, and he had the typical heavy weaponry had machine guns and bazookas, and he was like, oh well, they're like antiques from World War One, or I don't remember the skill that he gave, something quite crazy. So and so it's very difficult to play those things with players who are still don't capture the essence of a Lovecraftian character through their characters or character concept. There are also some players that actually manage to create a cool Lovecraftian character, someone who is not built to tackle the adventures, to take on anything, but they play Call of Cthulhu as if it were Dungeons and Dragons. They're almost like always searching for traps and taking treasure, but as you may expect, those characters do not live long in a true Call of Cthulhu game or style of game, because many times those treasures and spells in Call of Cthulhu are going to be the end of you. So it's very difficult to play a Call of Cthulhu session representing that Lovecraftian horror. And I've heard stories from other people as well. I remember I once talked with a French woman who also used to play Call of Cthulhu, and she also complained quite a bit that not a single one of the 10 sessions that she had played represented a true Lovecraft story. And Marco wants to like pinpoint that maybe it's the lack of uncertainty that the characters are already, or the player characters are already expecting something out of the adventure, and that inevitability that sometimes they can change a lot of the adventure because of the player character's actions, and that is logical because it's a role-playing game. However, I do remember a couple of Lovecraft stories that kind of stray away from this inevitability and uncertainty. Now, for those of you that haven't read too many Lovecraft stories, I'm going to give a few spoilers for the Dunwich horror and the case of Charles Dexter Ward. So you have been warned. I'm going to put a mark in the description below telling you when I'm going to stop spoiling those stories. But, well, you have been warned. I think those two stories differ a bit from Lovecraft's usual tales in a couple of, I would say, in the level of heroism within them, and that's very weird in Lovecraft stories. Heroic deeds are not the norm. And for example, let's talk about the Dunwich horror. You still have victims and many horrible things that happen throughout the story. There's destruction, there's quite a bit of mayhem because of the invisible nature and gigantic size of the Dunwich horror. But there is I forgot the name. I think it was Professor Armitage, correct? He's actually one of my favorite Lovecraft characters, and I kind of forgot his name right now. So, but well, Professor Armitage, if I'm not mistaken, he is one of the only Lovecraft characters that actually managed to defeat a Mythos entity, or something related to a Mythos entity, through the use of spells without becoming completely insane and without dying. And it seems almost improbable because he's a very old man, and you will expect that he wouldn't be suited for those tasks because he moves around quite a bit during that story. But he is probably, to put it in a way, the most powerful Lovecraft hero, because he's a human who not only managed to identify the threat in a decently short amount of time, he also used a Mythos spell with great success without becoming insane or dying. And so that's a story that I would consider deviates a bit from Lovecraft stories, because there is no immediate sense of inevitability. There are some things that you expect to happen, but when I first read that story, I was kind of like waiting, oh no, Armitage is going to die right now. He's going to die, but he survived the entire story. So that moves a bit away from that inevitability of the story, and it reduces a bit of the uncertainty in the sense that Armitage, because he's very intelligent, he deciphers quite a bit of the threat of the nature of Wilbur's brother, and does a pretty good job at identifying the problem and solving it. And in the case of Charles Dexter Ward, and I also forgot the name of the of the doctor that treated Charles Dexter Ward, he also identifies this problem and even goes. He's one of the few Lovecraft characters that goes alone into one of those places that you want those characters to explore more. He goes into that laboratory where he finds all sorts of ghastly and dark alchemy experiments, and even manages to decipher the right formula and incantation to defeat that Kerwin, who is trying to possess who effectively takes possession over his descendant. And so that's another Lovecraft hero that manages to thwart the plans of the enemy, of that unnameable horror that appears in all of Lovecraft's stories. Even though it's personified as Kerwin, you still know that Kerwin is using forces beyond our comprehension. And so in the case of those two stories, if someone in the past, when Lovecraft was still alive, if someone were to read those stories, he could probably think, oh, these aren't Lovecraft stories, the character survives at the end and they defeat the monster, this is probably some sort of hoax. But no, they're actually Lovecraft stories, and I think that they surprised some of his readers and fans quite a bit when they went through all those stories and they saw how they broke all of Lovecraft's usual conventions or sensibilities. So in that sense, I don't think that all RPG sessions deviate completely from Lovecraft stories, but that also means that it's quite difficult. So I can honestly tell you that all of my Call of Cthulhu stories, Realms of Cthulhu, anything related to Cthulhu or Lovecraft, I've never played a true Lovecraftian horror story, because in all of those stories the characters feel a lot like adventurers. Even though they are quite fragile, they are like ready to take on the Mythos and all that, and they take a very strong and organized approach to facing off against those aberrations. But that is not to say that it isn't a good idea to play around with those concepts. Well, I know that because of Marco's video, he actually thinks it's wrong to use the Mythos entities and themes away deviating from the Lovecraftian theme or the pureness of the Lovecraftian style. But I think you can have some pretty cool adventures playing around with those concepts as well. It's all up to anyone's preferences. I remember I talked with Paul A in one of my videos in the comment section, and he mentioned that we started talking about, he talked about Dune, and I compared a bit. He compared it to Lovecraft, and I gave my opinion on that, and we discovered that it was quite easy to take things from Lovecraft because all of his stories are somewhat disconnected with one another, even though they had that mythos, what would you say, thread. But as Marco said, it was something that was rather established by Lovecraft's fans and not by Lovecraft himself in a more solid or palpable way. And so Paul and I thought that it was quite easy to take anything that you wanted from Lovecraft and insert it pretty much anywhere that you like. And you can see this, Lovecraft appears in all role-playing games, in a lot of horror movies as well. You see him in Dungeons and Dragons, in quite unexpected places. Pretty much anything related to fiction that has some unnameable cosmic horror that can cause you sanity damage, and it has tentacles and tries to rule over the humans, to exterminate them. It probably has some influence on Lovecraft. So I actually think that it's some pretty cool games can result from playing around with those concepts. For example, I've never done it, but I've always thought when I get the time, I want to create like a superhero game using, for example, maybe Savage Worlds, with the Realms of Cthulhu and the Superhero Companion, and have like superheroes fighting different Cthulhu deities. Of course, you will have to use the stronger sanity and damage rules, because superheroes, well, they are awesome and above normal humans. So that would be a cool way to handle things. And in anime systems such as OVA or Valor, it will also work quite well in that over-the-top and exaggerated way. In fact, Valor contains a campaign that I defined as Lovecraftian heroes because they handle it a bit like that. And you can also see this in different anime as well. For example, there is this very exaggerated, over-the-top anime called Demonbane. It's based on a visual novel. I've never played the visual novel, but there you even have like giant robots fighting like a Cthulhu threat, and they also use special power names like Atlach-Nachta, you know, that spider deity from the Mythos, and Lemurian Impact, and all of those words and concepts and themes that are used in Lovecraft stories. So even Nyarlathotep and Herbert West make special appearances there. They're quite crucial for the story. So I think that it's a good idea to play around with those concepts, but if you are going for the pure Lovecraftian horror style, it's going to be extremely difficult unless the players and the keeper or game master, depending on the system that you are using, reach that sort of like an agreement, and they are quite professional, let's say, as to the way they're going to play the game, because those players need to be true pros when it comes to role playing. They need to find a way to fuse the character concept with their intention or desire to win in the game. That's not to say that you have to die, that you always have to die. In fact, some people have mixed opinions on some of the adventures produced by Chaosium, because in some of those adventures they tell you in this part, and I've heard, actually never seen of the adventure modules that I played, I've yet to see one that says this character needs to die and there is no way to save him. But I have heard that some of their better modules, and I hope you will correct me if I'm mistaken, but for example in the Horror and the Orient Express, I think it's called, I think there is a part where a character needs to die inevitably, that it shouldn't happen any other way. And I think that maybe they were following what Marco said, that you need that sense of inevitability. But when it comes to role-playing games, it's going to be quite difficult to keep that, because you still want the player characters, or the players themselves, to put it in a better way, you want them to have an influence on the story. So if we were to treat it as a very purist way, I think it would be almost impossible to play it in full Lovecraftian horror because of the reasons that Marco mentions. But I think it's not impossible, but the question is if it would be fun for everyone, because Lovecraft, well, he wrote those stories to be read and experienced as you being a passive observer, but RPGs are not passive. I think that's another key point. Perhaps that this would make a bit more... it would enhance the content presented by Marco in his video. You also have that a bit of sense of being passive, because maybe that's related to the inevitability, that you cannot do anything to change what is going to happen. But in RPGs, that is not so. That's the reason why we play role-playing games, because we want to affect the story. Either by being a player or being a game master, you want to have some influence that changes the outcome in unexpected ways. So I agree that, well, in my experience, I've never seen, based on the experience that others have shared with me, I have yet to see Call of Cthulhu game, or Realms of Cthulhu game, or Silent Legions, Trail of Cthulhu, the Cthulhu Hack. I have yet to see one Mythos game where they reach that level of Lovecraftian horror purity. But in the meantime, maybe we'll never achieve that level of purity, and it's quite logical because the master is dead, Lovecraft is dead, and he won't be able to give any tips or advice or whatever. But even so, Mythos games are pretty awesome. It's pretty fun to play around with those characters. Not all people love Lovecraft. I actually, some time ago, what was it, like 2 years ago, I read in a forum once a player saying like, oh, I hate Lovecraft, if I could travel back in time and murder him and something. That's But for example, personally, I love Lovecraft stories. He has, as you could tell from my Lovecraft video, he changed so many things for the better in my life through his fiction, filling with that sense of wonder. And I talk about what I like about horror in general in my questions and answers video. I'm going to put a link in the description below if you want to watch it. So I still have immense fun playing around with the monsters of Lovecraft, with those strange artifacts, with those spells. Oh, and that brings me to another, a bit of a separate subject, but I think it's worth talking about anyway. I think that urban exploration videos are a great source of inspiration for horror adventures. I like watching those videos, and there's a pretty good channel, Exploring with Josh. I'm going to put a link in the description below, and you can see these dilapidated buildings and ancient structures and caverns and whatnot, and you can get some pretty awesome ideas to generate horror adventures, or pretty much any adventure that the characters need to go into a dangerous and uncertain place. The Catacombs video in his channel is pretty good. He even shows like a little mountain of skulls and some like underground tunnels filled with water. So that's all great material for you to get inspired. And there are many other channels about urban exploration. So I highly recommend that you take a look and you get inspired by all of the places that they visit and go into, and buildings. So they're pretty much excellent for any type of campaign. Even if you're not playing horror, if you're playing, let's say, like a game of mobsters or something, you could have the encounters in those old buildings. Maybe they are closing a deal there or something, and something goes wrong, whatever. So once again, thanks for watching my video response. I hope you watch Marco's video as well on his channel. He's always bringing out videos that allow for great video response and comments. And I also invite you and anyone who is watching this video to either in the comment section below or producing your own video responses to share some of your opinions on Lovecraftian horror in role-playing games or in fiction. This theme is much greater than a single person can share about it. So it would be quite interesting for you to talk about your experiences, perhaps some funny stories when your player characters wanted to create like a marine who was armed to the teeth for no reason other than trying to survive and trying to slug it out with the horrors of the Mythos and then failing miserably. So comment, share your video responses, do watch Marco's video, and I hope we'll get to hear some interesting stories and anecdotes from all of you. Thanks again, and see you later.